The beginning of the story is about a little girl who was writing something on a letter, in which she writes that now she will never change and nor will she ever grow up. After writing so much, she comes out of her house and stands up and waits for the sun to rise. But as soon as she looks up, her eyes look yellow to us. Actually, that girl was a vampire. Now, as soon as the sun rises and the light of the sun falls on that girl, her whole body starts burning, causing her to die. After this, we see that during the day, no human being is visible in the whole world, and the whole world becomes an empty place. Now this happened because 10 years ago, due to an infected bat, a dangerous disease like plague spread all over the world, due to which most of the humans had become vampires, who hunted humans to satisfy their hunger and drank their blood. Because of this, the population of humans in the whole world began to decrease very rapidly, and only 5% of humans remained on Earth and the rest became vampires. Now, because vampires lived only by drinking the blood of humans, due to the decrease in the population of humans, there was a shortage of human blood to satisfy the hunger of vampires. That's why vampire researchers were busy making blood like human blood to satisfy the hunger of vampires. There were also some good vampires who were fighting to save humans, because by catching humans by vampires, they were being raised and killed in the lab to satisfy their need for blood. The scene shifts from here and we see the time of night, where people were seen again on the streets. These were all vampires who came out at night. All these vampires lived like humans and went to their work as soon as it was night. Here we see an old vampire who was trying to attack some vampire people on the way to take blood from them, because of which those vampires were afraid of that old vampire, that the police comes there and controls it by giving it electric shocks. At the same time, we see Dr. Edward Dalton going to his work from his car. Dr. Edward used to work in a vampire company called Bromley Marks. This company of Bromley used to supply blood to vampires along with making medicines. Edward was the chief of all the researchers there. Now, after passing through the security of the building, Edward goes to a room where humans are caught and locked in machines. And the researchers of this company take out their blood and experiment on that blood. Actually, they were trying to make fake blood like human blood so that they can quench the hunger of vampires with that fake blood, in which Edward was also included with those researchers. Actually, Edward was also a vampire, but he did not find it right to keep humans trapped in such machines, and he was very sad about his work. So, despite being a vampire, he did not drink the blood of humans, and only drank the blood of animals sometimes. Now from here, Edward goes to his lab and tries to make blood like human blood, but his test fails. After this, he goes to a meeting of this company in which his boss, that is, the owner of this company, Charles Bromley, his colleague Christopher, who works in his lab, a city commissioner, and an army officer are included. Now in this meeting, they come to know that the vampires who are not getting blood, they are turning into a dangerous creature, which they called as Subsiders. Due to not getting human blood, their ears were long and their heads were bent forward. And not only that, their thinking power was also decreasing. These Subsiders also started attacking vampires for blood. That's why in the beginning of the film, that old vampire had become so aggressive due to not getting blood, because he was turning into a Subsider. Now, because only 5% of the human population was left on Earth, that's why the owner of the company tells him that we have to make blood like human blood as soon as possible. Otherwise, due to lack of blood, other vampires will also become Subsiders. After the meeting, Bromley takes Edward to his office to talk about something personal. There, looking at the coffee served with blood, Edward forbids him to drink coffee. After this, Bromley tells him that he had cancer, but he got well because he became a vampire. He says that his daughter didn't want to become a vampire, that's why she ran away from home. Bromley tells Edward that I know you want to save humans, that's why you have to make blood like human blood as soon as possible. After this, Edward goes to his lab and discusses all these things with his partner Christopher. Christopher tells him hesitatingly that I am testing on a monkey, and to advance this test, I will have to do some more tests with which we may be able to make blood. After some time, the researchers start the test on a prisoner. At the same time, Bromley and some officers were watching this test from the window. Edward puts a blood substitute in that person's body, before which that person feels a little better. But later, when the whole substitute goes into the body, then he starts vomiting and his body starts changing and scars start appearing on the body. The researchers immediately catch him and inject a medicine called epimone into his body, which stops his movement and the body becomes as it was before. But immediately after this, his whole body explodes. That night, Edward goes home from the lab, and on the way, he sees news in his car, which tells about riots caused by blood rationing. That is, the vampire people started rioting due to the lack of blood. Meanwhile, Edward's ears start itching, and he starts looking at his ears in the mirror, which were getting longer and pointed. Meanwhile, due to the distraction, he is unable to see the car in front of him, due to which he has to turn the car and stop it at the last moment. But that second car collides collides with a circle on the side of the road. Edward comes out to help, but he gets shot in the hand. Then some people come out of the second car who were humans, and their leader was Audrey Bennett, who had a weapon called a crossbow, which protected her from the vampire. She had shot at Edward, but suddenly a police car is heard. Edward tells those people not to be afraid of him because he just wanted to help them. Then he asks them to sit in his car. After a little hesitation, they agree. Edward turns on his car's day protection system, which makes all the windows black. And as soon as the police come, he takes out the arrow in his hand. When the policeman asks him about the humans, he tells them the wrong direction and says that they have run away. In the car, Audrey gets Edward's ID badge, which tells her Edward's profession and his date of birth. When the police leave, they leave the car, and Audrey wishes Edward a happy birthday. Then they all leave. After a while, Edward reaches home. And then there is an announcement for all the vampires, which gives a warning for sunrise. Edward reaches home, has dinner, and then starts taking care of his plants. Suddenly, his brother Frankie Dalton comes to his house, who had not met him for months because he was in the army. Frankie asks Edward to throw a birthday party. On this, Edward says that he is now 35 years old. Then Frankie says that he should celebrate his birthday, and for that, he had brought a 100% pure, expensive bottle of human blood. He pours blood in 2 glasses and teases his brother about drinking pig blood, but Edward refuses to drink blood. And on this, Frankie gets angry and an argument starts between the two. Frankie says that Edward does not touch human blood, but still works for the same company that raises and kills humans for its benefit. On this, Edward says that to find a substitute for blood, it is necessary to do this bad work. But he also shows anger at Frankie because he hunts humans for the army. Then suddenly, Edward picks up the blood bottle and starts pouring all the blood into the drain. That's when Frankie takes the bottle from his hand and hits it against the wall. After this, Frankie tries to go, but a subsidiary comes in his way and he can't go. He goes to the creature's kitchen and starts licking the blood on the wall. And then he also licks the glass on the table. In the meantime, Frankie picks up a knife which shocks the subsidiary and pushes Frankie towards the wall. Frankie falls on the glass table, which breaks the glass on the table, and for a few seconds, Frankie becomes unconscious. Then the subsidiary moves towards Edward. Edward picks up a stool and tries to stop him. And at the same time, he calls out his name to bring his brother to his senses. Frankie comes to his senses and then holds the knife. Both brothers try to attack the subsidiary, but he jumps and hangs on the ceiling. This gives Frankie a chance and he cuts his head off. After a while, she goes there to find out about the police case and says that now the subsidiary has spread in the city. An officer finds a ring of that creature which tells Edward that he was a local gardener, and he also finds wounds on his body which were caused by eating himself. The next day, Edward wakes up when the security alarm goes off, and when he turns on the light to check, Audrey stands towards him crossbow aimed. Audrey says that she is looking for a vampire on whom people can trust, and for this, she thinks Edward is absolutely right. She gives him a paper sheet in which a map is made. Edward is looking at the map when suddenly a voice comes and Edward turns towards that voice, and Audrey quietly walks away. When Edward goes to check that voice, he finds out that the voice is Frankie's. Frankie asks him about Audrey and Edward says nothing and avoids him. That night, it is revealed in the news that the investors who had supplied humans to Bromley for research could not supply anymore. The next day, Edward goes to work and meets his boss and asks him for a guarantee that after getting the subsidiary he will not need the supply of humans. On this, Bromley says that most vampires will be happy to get the subsidiary, but there are some people who ask for the real thing. On this, Edward reminds him that his daughter is also one of them. After this, Edward goes to his lab to see the map. In the morning, Edward does not return home and turns on the light protection in his car and goes towards the village from the path indicated by the map. There, Audrey is already waiting for him. She asks him to come to a big tree. Edward parks his car under the tree and comes out of the car wearing a hat and sunglasses. He is always careful to avoid the sunlight. There, he meets a man whose name was Lionel Elvis Cormack. That man was a vampire who had now become a human. Edward wanted to know from him how he became a human, but when he sees Audrey coming close, he becomes quiet. He sees that Frankie had kept him at the gunpoint. Edward tries to stop him, but he does not listen and tells him that the army team is also coming. Hearing this, Audrey pushes Frankie towards the light and everyone quickly sits in Edward's car. By then, the soldiers reach there and start firing at them and also destroy Lionel's car. The soldiers follow them and also fire bullets, which makes a hole in the car's day protector. First, Audrey covers it with her hand and manages it, but as the hole gets bigger, the camera also gets damaged and Edward cannot see ahead. Then Lionel sits on the driving seat so that he can see the road through a hole and Edward hides behind the light. When the soldiers reach the bridge, Lionel drives very fast and crosses the bridge. However, the bridge breaks because the army truck is heavy and the truck gets blasted and the rest of the people are left behind. After nightfall, they park the car near the river and Lionel tells Edward that he used to do daylight modification in the car which saves people sitting in the car from the sunlight. And he was the first shop to install such a system in the car. Lionel says that it is amazing to drive a car during the day for vampires because the roads were empty during the day, but there was also a risk because firstly, they cannot see in the sunlight, and secondly, they have to save their body from the sunlight, and because of this, they are afraid of accidents, and the same happened with Lionel. One day, when he was driving during the day, he could not see anything and he did not eat anything, so his energy was also reduced and the car accidentally hit the river fence. Because of the crash, he fell into the river with the car, and before falling into the river, the car caught fire. When he came out of the river, he became a human again. When his wish was fulfilled, Audrey tells Edward to create such a situation with safety so that he can become a human again. On the other hand, Bromley sees some pictures of his daughter and Frankie comes there. Bromley tells her that if Edward comes back immediately, there will be no case on him. On this, Frankie says that whatever Bromley tells him to do, he is ready to do. Meanwhile, Edward and his companions are going home in the car. Edward repeatedly looks at Audrey's neck. Audrey notices this and looks at his pointed ears and understands that she is thirsty for blood. Then she cuts her hand and collects the blood coming out of it in a cup and gives it to him to drink. Edward first refuses, but when Audrey tells him that she wants to see the people around her safe, he drinks the blood. After a few hours, they reach an old grape garden called Vineyard. There, Edward meets some other people, whose leader is a man named Jarvis, who helps him find the remaining humans. After entering the house, he meets the vampire politician Wes Turner, who fights for human rights and helps save the lives of humans. There, Bromley sees that his machine has run out of humans and now there was no human left there. Researchers remove a human body from which all the blood had been removed and now it was of no use. Here, the scene shifts and a coffee shop is shown at the metro station where a man complains that there is no blood in his coffee. On this, the woman working there says that she is ordered to add only 5% blood to the coffee. But that man does not agree and steals a blood bag, and when he tries to open it to drink it, the blood scatters all over the place, causing everyone around to go crazy to drink blood and start a riot. Seeing this, the police come there and give them electric shocks. The next day, in the vineyard, Edward takes some blood from Lionel to do a test and talks to him about the day when he became a human. Edward thinks that to control the heat from the sun's light, the test of blood substitute can only be done inside the body. After working for a few hours, when he goes out of the lab to take a break, most people get away from him because he was a vampire. Then Audrey comes there and tells him that everyone is afraid of him, but he believes that he can help them. Edward says that he didn't want to become a vampire, but Frankie made him a vampire by deceit. Then Edward notices that there were big tanks there, in which grapes were fermented to make alcohol. Audrey says that all those tanks are airtight, then they both go under it to see it. There was a machine in the tank that was removing the air inside the tank quickly. Seeing this, Edward thinks that they could use it to extinguish the fire. Then they start working on their experiment. In the middle of the night, Jarvis's group takes the remaining humans to the vineyard, in which Bromley's daughter Allison was also there. Then someone shoots at the tire of his car, causing the car to stop. They take their weapons and get out of the car, but the army surrounds them from all sides, and after fighting for a while, all the humans lose. Allison tries to contact the vineyard, but becomes unconscious from exhaustion. Frankie takes a walkie-talkie from his hand and tracks that call to find the location. On the other hand, all the humans in the vineyard are sitting in their cars, collecting their own stuff and follow Turner to go to a safe place. But Edward wanted to stay there because he had to experiment. Lionel and Audrey also stop to help him. Here, when Allison wakes up, she finds herself in her father's office. And when her father Bromley comes, she picks up a knife. Allison asks her father to let her friends go. Bromley says that he is happy to see her and hugs her. Then he says that he can't do anything for his friends. On this, Allison pushes him and runs towards the door, but a soldier hits him and he becomes unconscious. Bromley realizes that his daughter has stabbed him. The next day, the experiment in the vineyard is about to start. Audrey takes the responsibility of looking at the monitors, and Lionel stays with Edward under the tank. A heart monitor is attached to Edward's chest, and it is covered with a wet blanket. The process is very simple. They open the tank, which brings in sunlight, and Edward starts burning. And after that, they use an air extractor to extinguish the fire. In the first 2 times, their attempt fails, but in the 3rd time, they let Edward burn for a long time. And this time their test succeeds and Edward becomes a human. They are very happy. But then the army comes and they hide in the barrel of alcohol to save themselves. On the other hand, Frankie goes to Bromley in the company who was being treated. Bromley asks Frankie to do something for his daughter and Frankie goes to see Allison. Allison still didn't want to be a vampire, but Frankie bites her with his teeth so that she becomes a vampire. Here in the vineyard, all 3 people leave their hiding place. Edward goes out, and for the first time when sunlight touches his skin, he feels very good. Lionel takes out his old car. Meanwhile, in the company, after seeing his empty machine, Bromley goes to meet his daughter. Blood is given to Allison to drink, but she does not drink blood. Bromley goes to her and sees that she was biting herself with her teeth, which infected her. Then she attacks her father and blames him for everything. Then Allison is removed from there and military law is implemented everywhere, after which they could fight the subsidies freely on the streets. Meanwhile, Audrey, Edward and Lionel come to Turner's cabin, where they see that all the people have died. Audrey feels that there is no hope left, but Edward says that he knows someone who can help them. Meanwhile, Christopher is shown in the lab who was still experimenting. There, the army pulls the subsidies and takes them to die in the sunlight, and Allison is also one of them. Seeing him die, Frankie realizes his mistake. That night, Christopher comes to his house and sees Edward, Audrey and Lionel waiting for him. Edward tells him that he has a solution which is better than a substitute and asks him to help him. Their conversation stops due to the phone ringing. Christopher goes to receive the call. When he is late, everyone suspects him and Audrey follows him to check. Edward and Lionel check his coat. Here it is found that Christopher had kept his phone on call, and all the people of the company knew where Edward and his companions were. Suddenly, the army comes there and Audrey falls unconscious in the fight and is caught. Lionel and Edward escape from there through the tunnel made on the road and decide to hide in an old, deserted building. But a subsidiary attacks them. Frankie comes there and shoots the creature. He notices that his brother has become a human. Seeing this, Frankie says that he made Edward a vampire because he didn't want to see him die. He apologizes for his mistake and now wants to help him. But when Lionel comes close, Frankie wants to drink blood and jumps on him. Edward catches him and pushes him away from Lionel. He is about to shoot him, but he notices something and stops. After a while, Edward enters the building of the company and turns off all his alarms. Security catches him and takes him to Bromley's office. There he sees that Bromley was cutting Audrey's hand and drinking her blood. Edward says that he is sad for everything and wants to become a vampire again. Hearing this, Audrey thinks that Edward is cheating on her and she gets upset, but Bromley says that he has got a substitute and that's why he doesn't need Edward, and he calls her a coward. On this, Edward tells Bromley that he is also a coward who couldn't turn his own daughter into a vampire. Bromley gets angry and cuts Edward, but Edward doesn't react because this was Edward's plan and Bromley turns into a human. Then Edward remembers that Frankie had also turned into a human. This tells us that the vampires who had become humans, their blood had become the solution. Meanwhile, Bromley presses the alarm and calls security. Then the army truck reaches there. Soldiers come out of their cars and open the door and see that Bromley is tied in a chair. All the vampires go crazy and start filling their stomachs with his blood. Meanwhile, Audrey and Edward come down with some weapons and are about to leave the building, but a lot of soldiers come and block their way. Meanwhile, a car breaks the glass door and comes inside, in which Lionel and Frankie are sitting. They hit the soldiers and reach Edward to save him, but soon they are surrounded again. Frankie asks Edward to leave and all the soldiers jump on him and start eating him. Edward is sad about his brother's death. Then the security guards take Audrey with them and Edward follows them to the security room to save him. After a lot of struggle, the vampire kills 2 guards and helps Audrey to kill the 3rd guard. Then he sees in the security camera that the soldiers who ate Frankie have become humans and the remaining soldiers are attacking the human soldiers. Then Edward and Audrey return to the lobby. Only a few human soldiers survive. Then Christopher comes and shoots some soldiers. Then he is about to shoot Edward and Audrey, but suddenly an arrow hits his chest and he dies. This arrow was fired by Lionel to save him. Then Audrey hugs him. Edward sees his brother's body and the sunlight coming in. Then the 3 of them sit in Lionel's car and Edward says that now he has a cure and he can do everything as he did before. With this, the movie ends.